Hello, my friends, and welcome back. Last episode, we took a deep dive into the murky waters of the modern information age. We gave our enemy a name, the Infodemic. We defined its three horsemen, the honest mistakes of misinformation, the deliberate lies of disinformation, and the weaponized truth of malinformation. We played armchair psychologist, looking at the cognitive biases like confirmation bias and the backfire effect that make our brains so vulnerable to falsehoods. And we equipped ourselves with a powerful toolkit, the SIFT method, to help us separate facts from fiction in our own media consumption. It was a journey into the mechanics of the problem. It was a conceptual deep dive. We built a framework for understanding, for thinking critically, and for protecting our own minds from the flood of bad information. And that is an essential foundational first step. But there's a second step, one that's often much harder, much messier, and much more personal. It's one thing to sit alone with your phone or laptop and correctly identify a piece of clickbait, a viral hoax, or a set of unsubstantiated claims, but it's an entirely different thing to know what to do when that same piece of information is brought up by your father at the dinner table, shared with celebratory emojis by a friend in a group chat, or stated as undeniable fact by a colleague during a lunch break. Suddenly, the issue is no longer just about information. It's about relationships. It's about navigating social dynamics, preserving family harmony, and maintaining a professional demeanor. How do you challenge an idea without challenging the person who holds it? How do you express skepticism without starting a fight? How do you stand up for what is true without coming across as arrogant or condescending? That's exactly what today's episode is all about. We are moving from the quiet internal work of critical thinking to the loud external work of critical conversation. This is your guide to talking about truth and lies in the real world. We are moving from theory to practice. We'll start by exploring why these conversations are so uniquely difficult in the first place, looking at the psychological tripwires that so often cause them to explode. Then we will arm ourselves with precise vocabulary, the specific words that can help us name what we're seeing with clarity and authority. And finally, we will walk through a series of practical, real-world scenarios complete with tips, tricks, and the exact phrases you can use to navigate these thorny conversations with more grace, more confidence, and a much greater chance of a positive outcome. So, my friends, the goal today isn't to teach you how to win every argument. In fact, we'll talk a lot about why winning is often the wrong goal entirely. The goal is to equip you with the skills to be a force for clarity and reason in your own corner of the world, to express yourself effectively, and to do so in a way that, whenever possible, builds bridges instead of burning them. I'm Danny, and this is a new episode from English Plus Podcast, and this is our second episode from the Infodemic theme of the week. Before we get to the tools and tactics, we need to have a clear and honest understanding of the battlefield. Why do conversations about misinformation so often go wrong? Why do they feel so frustrating, so unproductive, so utterly exhausting? It's not just your imagination. There are powerful psychological and technological forces at play that make these discussions uniquely challenging. The first, and perhaps most significant, is a concept we touched on last time, the backfire effect. As a quick reminder, the backfire effect is that completely counterintuitive phenomenon where, when presented with facts that contradict a deeply held belief, people can end up rejecting the facts and strengthening their support for their original incorrect belief. Your attempt to douse the flames with the water of evidence somehow acts like gasoline. Think about what's really happening here. For beliefs that are tied to our identity, like our political affiliation, our core values, our sense of who we are in the world, a factual challenge isn't received as a helpful piece of new data. It's received as a personal attack. It feels like you're not just questioning the information, you're questioning their judgment, their intelligence, their very identity as a good, smart person. And when people feel attacked, their defenses go up. Their brain switches from learning mode to combat mode. The goal is no longer to carefully evaluate new information, but to protect their worldview at all costs. You've seen this happen. You get into a debate with someone about a contentious topic. You've done your homework. You pull out your phone and show them a series of articles from credible sources, official reports, expert testimony. You lay out a perfect, logical, ironclad case. And what's the result? The person doesn't just disagree, they become even more entrenched in their opinion. They start attacking your sources, questioning the motives of the experts, and doubling down on their original belief. You came to have a discussion. They are now fighting a war to defend their sense of self. Understanding this is the first step to changing your strategy. You realize that leading with an overwhelming barrage of facts can be the least persuasive thing you can do. The second major hurdle is the reality of our modern technological landscape. We are increasingly living in what are called echo chambers and filter bubbles. The algorithms that control our social media feeds and search results have one primary goal: to keep us engaged. And they've learned that the best way to do that is to show us content that confirms what we already believe. They see you like articles with one political viewpoint, so they show you 100 more just like it, while hiding content from the other side. The result is that we are living in personalized digital universes, each with its own set of approved facts, trusted experts, and accepted truths. We are in a hall of mirrors, and we've mistaken it for the world. So when you try to have a conversation with someone who is deep inside a different filter bubble, you're not just disagreeing on a fine topic. You are often operating from two completely different, mutually exclusive realities. You're not just standing on opposite sides of an issue, you're standing on different planets. You cite a major international news organization, they cite a YouTube video of a man shouting in his basement. You point to a peer-reviewed scientific study, they point to a blog post from a website called The People's Truth. In their world, the YouTuber and the blogger are the brave truth tellers, and the news organization and the scientific journal are the corrupt establishment. And in your world, the exact opposite is true. There is no shared foundation of fact to build upon. This is why these conversations can feel so surreal and impossible. You can't even agree on the basic laws of informational physics. And finally, there's the simple and profound reality of the emotional toll. Constantly being bombarded with bad news, outrageous claims, and angry arguments leads to a state of being called outrage fatigue. It's the mental and emotional exhaustion that comes from living in a state of perpetual crisis. It's tiring. It is profoundly draining to feel like you have to be a fact checker and a debater in every social interaction. The temptation to just disengage, to say it's not worth the fight, is immense. It's a form of self-preservation, let's face it. So, when we step into one of these thorny conversations, this is what we're up against. A person whose brain is wired to treat our facts as a personal attack, who may be living in a completely different information reality, and both of you are likely tired and emotionally worn down from the broader infodemic. It's no wonder things go badly. But understanding these challenges isn't a reason to give up. It's the reason we need a better strategy. It's why we need to trade brute force for finesse and argument for communication. So let's start with the core vocabulary for speaking. That's coming next. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. Before you can effectively talk about a problem, you have to be able to name it correctly. Using precise language is not about sounding smart. It is sometimes, but it's not just about that. It's about bringing clarity to a confusing situation. When you accurately label a piece of bad information, you move the conversation away from a vague he said, she said argument and toward a more objective analysis. It gives you a scalpel instead of sledgehammer. Now let's review some of the core vocabulary we've already introduced, but this time let's focus specifically on how to use these words strategically in a conversation. First, we have hoax, H-O-A-X. A hoax is a malicious deception, a trick played on the public. It's an elaborate, fabricated story designed to fool people. The power of using the word hoax in a conversation is that it immediately highlights the element of deliberate public trickery. You're not just saying the information is wrong, you're saying it's a known, constructed falsehood. For example, if someone shares that old picture of a shark swimming down a flooded highway, you could say, "Oh, that picture is actually a well-known internet hoax. It's been circulating for years and gets attached to every new flood." Or if a friend tells you about a shocking celebrity rumor, you can say, for example, "I looked that up and it seems to have originated as a hoax on a satirical news site." So that's the first important word in our conversation today. Next, we got propaganda. 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 Propaganda is information that is spread specifically to promote a political cause or a particular point of view. Its goal is not to inform, but to influence. Using the word propaganda is powerful because it shifts the focus to the motive behind the information. It encourages the other person to think about who created this message and why. It points to a systemic, often political effort to manipulate public opinion. When discussing a very one-sided documentary, you might say, for example, "I felt the film was less of a balanced report and more like political propaganda. It seemed designed to make you feel a certain way rather than present all the facts." Or you can say regarding a state-sponsored news report, "You have to be careful with that source. It's often criticized for being a tool for government propaganda." So that's about propaganda. Then there's the term we hear all the time, conspiracy theory. A conspiracy theory is an explanation for an event that claims a secret plot by powerful and sinister groups is the real cause. The key feature is that it rejects the standard or official explanation. By naming something a conspiracy theory, you are identifying a specific structure of belief. You're pointing out that this explanation relies on a secret plot for which there is typically no verifiable evidence. In a discussion about a historical event, you could say, for example, "While the official report has its critics, most of the alternative explanations fall into the realm of conspiracy theory as they require us to believe in a massive cover-up with no leaks." Or, more gently to a friend, you can say, "I know it's a compelling idea, but that sounds a lot like a conspiracy theory I've heard before. It seems to lack the kind of evidence you'd expect for such a huge claim." So that's conspiracy theory, my friends. Next, let's move to the digital world. And a crucial word here is clickbait. Now, clickbait refers to headlines and content designed with the main purpose of attracting attention and getting you to click a link. The power of this word is that it, once again, focuses on the motive. The goal isn't to inform, it's to generate advertising revenue. Pointing this out can depersonalize the conversation. You're not criticizing your friend for falling for it. You're criticizing the cynical system that created it. For example, that headline is classic clickbait. They use sensational language to get you to click, but the actual article rarely delivers on the promise. Or, "I try not to share articles from that site. It's mostly clickbait, and it makes it harder to find high-quality journalism." So that's about clickbait, my friends. And now, perhaps the most useful and versatile phrase in your entire toolkit is unsubstantiated claims. I know it's a bit mouthful, but it's a very important word. Unsubstantiated claims. Now, unsubstantiated, which is spelled, by the way, unsubstantiated, unsubstantiated. Well, this means not supported or proven by evidence. Now, this phrase is your secret weapon because it is neutral, analytical, and non-accusatory. You're not calling the other person a liar. You're not saying the information is definitely false. You're simply pointing out that the necessary proof is missing. This lowers defenses and focuses the conversation on the most important thing, the evidence. For example, you can say, "I read that article, but I found it was full of unsubstantiated claims and didn't cite any of its sources." Or, the problem with that video is that it makes a lot of sweeping, unsubstantiated claims without offering any real data to back them up. Or you can say, as a rule, I'm wary of any report that relies on unsubstantiated claims from anonymous sources. So that's a very important word you can add to your arsenal, unsubstantiated claims. And finally, on the positive side, you have the phrase credible source. A credible source is one that is trustworthy, reliable, and has a reputation for accuracy. This is the standard you can hold up as your goal. It allows you to frame your skepticism not as negativity, but as a commitment to quality. For example, that's a really interesting point. I'd love to see if it's being reported by a credible source as well. Or you can say, for example, before I share something like that, I always try to check if I can find the same information from at least 2 credible sources. So my friends, these words are very important. Mastering these words allows you to speak with precision. You're no longer just saying that's wrong or that's a lie. You're diagnosing the specific type of information problem, and in doing so, you invite a more intelligent and less emotional conversation. But of course, that's step 1 of our episode. Step 2, we're going to get our hands dirty a little more. We're going to talk about some scenarios and skills. And that's going to be your conversation toolkit. That's coming next. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. All right, we understand the challenges and we have our precise vocabulary. And now let's put it all into practice. We're going to walk through 3 common scenarios, from the most personal to the most public. For each one, we'll identify the core skill, offer some practical tips, and provide you with key phrases you can adapt and use. Let's start with scenario number 1, the Aunt Carol moment. Now, the scene is a familiar one. Your phone buzzes. It's the family group chat. Your beloved great aunt, Aunt Carol, has shared a meme or a forwarded message. It is a blurry screenshot of text filled with alarming emojis and capital letters claiming something outrageous. That a common vegetable cures a deadly disease. Or that a new law will have some bizarre and terrifying consequence. You know it's false. Your immediate impulse might be to jump in and write, Aunt Carol, that's completely fake. You need to stop sharing this nonsense. But we know from our discussion of the backfire effect that this direct, aggressive correction will likely be perceived as a public rebuke. She may feel embarrassed or attacked, and she will probably get defensive. The goal here is not to prove you're right and she's wrong. The goal is to gently introduce a moment of critical thinking and, just as importantly, to protect your relationship with her. So let's move to the skill of gentle correction and questioning. Now, let me give you some tips here. First one, act. Don't react. Take a breath. Remember, your goal is to help, not to humiliate. Use I statements. Frame your response around your own feelings or process, not her mistake. And the second tip, move to a private channel. If possible, reply to her directly in a private message. This avoids public shame and makes the conversation a dialogue instead of a confrontation. And ask questions. Don't make statements. Questions are less threatening than declarations. They invite curiosity rather than demanding agreement. And now let me share some key phrases that can help you in this scenario. You can say something like, that's an interesting one. Where did you see that? Why does this work? Well, this is the perfect neutral opening. It's a simple, non-judgmental question that gently prompts her to think about the source of the information, which is the first step of the SIFT method that we talked about, remember? You're not saying your source is bad, you're just asking what it is. You can say something like, I'm a bit skeptical about that. It sounds a little far-fetched to me. Now, why does that work? Well, you're using an I statement. The skepticism is yours, which is less confrontational than saying that is far-fetched. The phrase a bit skeptical is soft and polite. It opens the door for a discussion rather than slamming it shut. You can say something like, I think I've seen that one before and I remember reading that it was a hoax. It's so hard to know what's real online these days. Now, why does this work? Well, this does 3 things brilliantly. First, it gently corrects the information by labeling it a hoax. Second, it normalizes the mistake by saying you've seen it before, implying that many people fall for it. And third, it ends with a unifying statement of solidarity. It's so hard to know what's real. You've moved from being her opponent to being her ally in a confusing world. Now let's imagine the conversation. She posts the meme. Instead of a public takedown, you send her a private message and say, "Hey, Aunt Carol, saw that post you shared. That's a pretty wild claim. I was curious, so I did a quick search and it looks like it's actually a well-known hoax that's been debunked by a few credible sources. It's so easy to get tricked by this stuff. It happens to me too. I just wanted to give you a heads up." See the difference? The tone is helpful, empathetic, and collaborative. You've corrected the information while preserving the relationship. And that is a true win. But that is only the first scenario. Now, the second scenario, let's talk about the confident colleague. Now, let's move out of the family and into the workplace. It's a lunch break and you're making coffee in the break room. A coworker you generally like and respect starts talking about a current event and then veers off into a full-blown conspiracy theory. They state with complete confidence that a major global event was secretly orchestrated by a shadowy cabal. They're not just sharing a meme, they're stating this as their researched, considered opinion. Now, the stakes here are different. This is your professional environment. A heated argument can create lasting awkwardness and damage working relationships. At the same time, you may feel a responsibility not to let a dangerous falsehood pass unchallenged. Your goal is not to deprogram them or even change their mind. Your goal is to signal your disagreement respectfully, establish your own commitment to evidence, and gracefully exit the conversation. The skill we're going to talk about here is asking for evidence and setting boundaries. Let me give you a couple of tips. My first tip is to stay calm and professional. Keep your tone of voice even and your body language neutral. Avoid eye rolling or scoffing. And focus on the evidence, not the person. Don't question their intelligence or sanity. Question the quality of the information they're presenting. And my third tip here is know your exit strategy. My friends, not every conversation needs a resolution, and most of them don't get to that result. It is perfectly acceptable and often very wise to end the discussion without agreement. And that's fine. And now let's talk about some key phrases that we can use in this scenario. We can say something like, "Wow, that's a big claim. What's the best source you've seen on that?" And why does that work? Well, like our first scenario, it starts with a question about the source. The phrase, "that's a big claim," validates that you've heard them while subtly implying that big claims require big evidence. Asking for the best source is a respectful way to ask for their strongest piece of proof. Let me give you another phrase. "Is there any corroborating evidence for that from more mainstream sources?" Why does that work? Well, this is a very intelligent and precise question. Corroborating evidence. Corroborating evidence is evidence that confirms or supports a statement. You're asking if this information exists outside of their specific information bubble. It shows that you are an evidence-based thinker without being dismissive of their initial source. All right, let me give you another phrase. "I'd need to see a lot more data from a credible source before I could get on board with that." Why does that work? Well, this is a powerful boundary-setting statement. It's an I statement focused on your own standards of evidence. You're not telling them they're wrong. You're stating what it would take for you to be convinced. It puts the burden of proof on them and signals that your standards are high. And that's okay. And let me share another useful phrase here. I think we'll have to agree to disagree on this one. Now, why does that work? Well, this is your eject button. When you see the conversation is going in circles and the other person is becoming defensive, use this phrase. It is a polite, universally understood signal that the discussion is over. It allows both parties to save face and move on. So your coworker makes their claim. You could respond and say, "That's a fascinating perspective. Personally, I tend to be pretty skeptical of theories like that unless I see them verified by multiple credible sources. I'd need to see a lot more data before I could believe it. Anyway, did you see the quarterly report?" Now here you've stated your opinion, outlined your standards, and gracefully changed the subject. You didn't start a fight, but you also didn't silently acquiesce to a falsehood, which is very important. Nodding along is not the answer, and starting a fight is not the answer. It's always somewhere in between, somewhere clever in between. All right, so So that was our second scenario. Next, let's talk about our third scenario, the online debate. Well, this is the final frontier, the digital Wild West. You're scrolling through social media and you see a post from an acquaintance or a public figure that is deliberately provocative and full of misinformation. The comment section is already a raging dumpster fire of insults and arguments. The temptation to jump in, to correct the record, to fight for what's right, well, it's powerful. But you must be strategic. Online comment sections are rarely places of genuine debate and persuasion. They're often arenas for performance. Your goal should not be to change the mind of the original poster or the most aggressive commenters. They are almost certainly unreachable. Your goal is to present a calm, clear, and credible counterpoint for the benefit of the other people reading, the silent majority who are on the fence or simply looking for clarity. So let's talk about the skill here: de-escalation and identifying fallacies. Let me give you a couple of tips here. The first tip is don't feed the trolls. Now, trolls are people who post inflammatory content to provoke an emotional reaction. They thrive on anger. The most powerful thing you can do to a troll is ignore them or respond with calm, detached reason. The second tip is recognize distraction tactics. Be on the lookout for common fallacies. Someone might use a red herring, which is an irrelevant topic brought up to distract from the main issue. Or they might try to muddy the waters by making the issue more confusing with jargon or irrelevant details to avoid addressing the core claim. That happens a lot every day online. You gotta be careful. And my third tip here is correct the idea, not the person. Avoid ad hominem attacks or insulting the person. Focus exclusively on the quality of the information. Now let me share some key phrases with you here. You can say something like, "It seems like the original point is getting lost here. The core claim was X, and the evidence for that appears to be unsubstantiated." Why does that work? This is a perfect response when a debate has been derailed by a red herring. It calmly recenters the conversation on the original point and uses our powerful neutral phrase, unsubstantiated. All right? Another phrase. I think some of these comments are trying to muddy the waters. The fundamental question is simple. Is there credible evidence for this claim? So far, I haven't seen any presented. Why does that work? Well, you are naming the tactic, muddy the waters, which shows you understand what's happening. You then simplify the issue back to its core, the need for evidence. This provides a moment of clarity for other readers. Another phrase you can say, instead of trading insults, let's look at the sources. The claim in the original post comes from source X. You name the source here. Media bias trackers rate that source as having very low factual accuracy. In contrast, here's a report on the same topic from Reuters or Associated Press or BBC, which are widely considered credible sources. Why does that work? Well, this is the ultimate high ground maneuver. You refuse to engage in the emotional fight and instead pivot to a calm, objective analysis of source quality. You are not just stating your opinion, you are demonstrating the process of critical thinking for everyone else to see. By using these strategies, you transform yourself from just another angry commenter into a voice of reason. You may not change the troll's mind. Maybe sometimes that's impossible, but that's okay. But you might just influence the dozens or hundreds of other people who are reading along silently. And that should be your main goal. Well, my friends, we've covered a lot of ground today. We've looked into the heart of why talking about misinformation is so difficult, from the psychology of the backfire effect to the technological reality of our echo chambers. We've armed ourselves with a more precise vocabulary to name the problems we see, and we've walked through 3 challenging scenarios, equipping ourselves with concrete strategies and phrases to communicate more effectively and protect our relationships and our own mental peace. The overarching theme is a shift in our goal. The objective in these conversations is rarely to achieve a dramatic instant conversion. It's not about winning an argument. The goal is to be clear, calm, and consistent advocate for the process of critical thinking. It's about planting a small seed of doubt about a bad source. It's about modeling a better way to have a disagreement. It's about signaling your own commitment to evidence and truth, and in doing so, creating a small island of sanity in a sea of noise. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be dragged down into the mud. And I'll be honest with you, this is not easy work. It requires patience, empathy, and a great deal of emotional self-control. You will not always get it right, and some conversations will be frustrating no matter what you do. That's okay. The point is not perfection. It is intention. So, for your challenge this week, I want you to start small. I challenge you to practice just one thing, the art of the gentle question. The next time you are in a situation where someone shares something you know to be false, be it with family, a friend, or a colleague, resist the urge to immediately correct or debunk. Instead, just ask one simple, curious question. Try something like, "Where did you see that?" Or, "What's the source on that?" That's it. You don't have to engage in a full debate. Just ask the question and see what happens. That one small act can begin to shift the dynamic from a confrontation to a conversation. And conversations are where real change begins. And with that, my friends, we come to the end of our second episode from the theme of this week, the epidemic, where we focused on vocabulary and speaking. Tomorrow, we're going to focus on writing and grammar. You don't want to miss that. Come again tomorrow to continue our conversation for this week about the infodemic. And don't forget that this is the Infodemic week, so you can find new magazine articles, learning quizzes on the website EnglishPlusPodcast.com. You can go check them out. And if you want to unlock access to all our episodes, subscribe on Apple Podcasts or on Patreon. You can find the links in the description of the episode. That being said, thank you very much for listening to another episode from English Plus Podcast. I'll see you again tomorrow. And remember, never stop learning.